Emily was a dedicated nurse who had been working at the community hospital in the city for almost 10 years. She loved her job and felt fulfilled in being able to care for and help people during the most difficult moments of their lives. Every day, Emily arrived early at the hospital, excited for another day of challenges and emotions. At 34 years old, Emily was a strong and determined woman with a huge heart. Her patients loved her for her kindness, patience, and attention to the smallest details. She always went above and beyond what was expected, adding a special touch to the care she provided. "Good morning, everyone." Emily greeted the team upon arrival, with a smile on her face. "Let's go, we've got a lot of people who need us today." She then went through the reception, greeting the staff and checking the schedule for the day. She knew exactly where each of her patients was and how she could best serve them. Her routine was demanding, but Emily loved every minute of it. "Hey, Emily, how do you keep this energy every day?" teased the receptionist, Marissa. "You're a real firecracker, girl." "Oh, Marissa, it's just about loving what we do," Emily replied, winking and heading to the patient wing. That would be another busy day at the hospital, but Emily was ready to face it with all her heart and dedication. As soon as she arrived in the patient wing, Emily made sure to go from bed to bed, checking how each of them had spent the night. She stopped to talk to the patients, asking about their symptoms, their fears, and their expectations. "Good morning, Mr. Antonio. How are you feeling today?" Emily said, gently stroking the arm of the bedridden elderly man. "Ah, Emily, the night was a little agitated, but I'm feeling better now that you're here." Mr. Antonio responded with a weary smile. Emily took notes on her clipboard and then provided the necessary medications and care for each patient. She checked vital signs, changed dressings, assisted with personal hygiene, and ensured that everyone was comfortable. "Let's go, Mrs. Marley, let's change this dressing and make that leg of yours as good as new," Emily said in her soft, welcoming voice. "Oh, my dear, you're an angel. I don't know what I'd do without you around here." Mrs. Marley thanked her as Emily carefully tended to her wound. During her breaks, Emily would walk through the hallways, making sure everything was in order. She made sure the patients were receiving the proper attention from the team and resolved any issues that arose. "Girls, I need you to keep an eye on Mr. Antonio. He seems a little more agitated today. Call me if anything happens." Emily instructed the nursing technicians, who promptly nodded in agreement. Nothing escaped Emily's attentive eyes. She was the head nurse of that wing and felt responsible for each of those patients. Her only goal was to ensure the best care and full recovery for everyone. One morning, as Emily was making her rounds, she was informed about a new patient who had been admitted during the night. It was a woman of approximately 40 years old, in a state of deep coma. "Hey, Emily, we have a newbie here." She arrived in the middle of the night, in critical condition. "The on-call doctor wants you to keep an eye on her," Marissa, the receptionist, warned. "Understood. I'll go take a look," Emily replied, promptly heading to the new patient's bed. Upon entering the room, Emily was surprised by the delicacy and fragility of the woman. She seemed so calm and serene, despite being connected to all those medical devices. "Hello, dear. I'm Nurse Emily, and I'll take very good care of you," Emily said, gently adjusting the sheets over Sophia, who was the patient's name. As Emily inspected Sophia's medical chart, she noticed that the woman had some injuries and bruises on her body. This left her intrigued, as there was no information about what might have happened. How strange. I'll have to check this out more carefully, Emily murmured, jotting everything down on her clipboard. She then checked the vital signs, the prescribed medications, and performed the initial care for Sophia. Despite the critical condition, Emily felt a special connection with that patient. "Stay calm, dear. I'll take very good care of you. Don't worry," Emily whispered, tenderly caressing Sophia's hand. This would be the beginning of an unexpected journey for the dedicated nurse, who would begin to notice something very unusual in the behavior of this mysterious patient. In the following days, Emily began to follow Sophia's case more closely. She was intrigued by the lack of information about what had happened to the patient and the strange marks on her body. This woman arrived here in critical condition, but no one knows what happened. "This is very strange," Emily commented to Marissa during one of her breaks. "It's true, Emily. Even the police couldn't find out much. They say it was an accident, but the marks on her body don't match that version," Marissa responded, furrowing her brow. While caring for Sophia, Emily noticed some details that left her even more intrigued. She noticed that sometimes the cardiac and neurological monitors showed small changes, as if Sophia was trying to communicate in some way. This is very curious. Could she be trying to communicate in some way? Emily wondered, observing the patient's every movement and signal attentively. One time, when Emily was administering the medications, Sophia gently squeezed her hand, as if she wanted to get her attention. "Sophia, can you hear me? If you can hear me, squeeze my hand again," Emily said, holding the patient's hand delicately. To her surprise, Sophia repeated the same gesture, squeezing Emily's hand with a little more force. The nurse was shocked, but tried to remain calm. "My God, is she conscious, despite the coma?" Emily murmured, feeling a shiver run down her spine. From that moment on, Emily began to observe Sophia even more attentively, trying to understand what was happening. She felt that there was something very wrong in this situation and was determined to uncover the truth. After that episode with Sophia squeezing her hand, Emily became even more determined to find out what was going on. She knew she had to act cautiously, as she did not want to raise any suspicions or jeopardize her career. "I have to be very discreet in this investigation. I can't let anyone suspect what I'm doing," Emily thought, as she reviewed Sophia's medical records in search of clues. During her breaks, Emily scoured the medical records, looking for any relevant information. She also discreetly spoke with other hospital professionals, trying to obtain some clue about the case. "Hey, Marcos, do you know if the police were able to find out anything about the patient Sophia?" "That case really intrigued me," Emily said, feigning indifference. "Unfortunately, no. It seems they couldn't come to any conclusion about what happened." "The case remains unanswered," Marcos responded, unaware of Emily's true motives. In addition, Emily began to observe Sophia with even more attention during her daily care. She was looking for any sign, any subtle movement that could indicate the patient was conscious, despite the coma. "Come on, Sophia, give me a sign. I know you're there, fighting," Emily whispered, gently holding the patient's hand. Gradually, Emily began to gather some clues, but she was still not sure what they meant. She felt she was getting closer to the truth, but knew she would need more evidence to prove her suspicions. "Something very wrong is happening here. I'm going to find out, no matter what," Emily said, determined, as she prepared for another shift at the hospital. As Emily deepened her discreet investigation, she began to find some clues that left her increasingly worried and intrigued. First, she noticed that Sophia's admission medical report did not contain detailed information about the cause of the coma. It only mentioned that it was an accident without further details. This is very strange. How can a hospital receive a critically ill patient without knowing exactly what happened? Emily questioned, analyzing the medical record. Then, when she spoke again with Marissa, the receptionist, Emily discovered that the police also seemed to be having difficulty investigating the case. You know, Emily, the police have been here a few times, but they couldn't get much information. It seems there were no witnesses to what happened to Mrs. Sophia, Marissa said, with a tone of concern. Emily became even more intrigued. Why were there no witnesses? What could have happened to Sophia to leave her in that state? During her daily care, Emily also began to notice details that bothered her. She noticed that some of the marks and injuries on Sophia's skin did not seem compatible with a simple accident. This looks more like an attack, Emily murmured, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Furthermore, Emily noticed that at certain times, Sophia's vital signs showed unexplained changes, as if she was going through some kind of stress or anguish. My God, is she suffering? Emily anguished, feeling a great desire to help the patient. Gradually, the pieces of that puzzle began to fit together in Emily's mind, and she began to suspect that something very serious had happened to Sophia. Now, she needed to find a way to share her concerns with someone who could help her unravel this mystery. After gathering all the evidence and clues, Emily decided it was time to share her concerns with the doctor responsible for Sophia's case. She knew she needed professional help to investigate more deeply what was happening. One day, during the shift change, Emily asked for a private conversation with Dr. Enrique, the head physician of the ward. Dr. Enrique, can we talk for a minute? I have some concerns about the patient Sophia that I would like to discuss with you, Emily said, with a serious tone. Of course, Emily. Let's go to my office, the doctor replied, noticing the nurse's worried expression. In the office, Emily detailed all her suspicions and observations about Sophia's case. She explained the inconsistencies in the medical records, the strange marks on the patient's body, and the changes in her vital signs. Doctor, I have a strong impression that something very serious happened to this woman. She doesn't seem to have suffered just a simple accident, Emily concluded, looking at the doctor with determination. However, to her surprise, Dr. Enrique reacted in a completely unexpected way. Emily, I understand your concerns, but I think you're getting too involved in this case. There was probably just an unfortunate accident, and the police are already investigating, the doctor said, with a calm expression. But, doctor, I have proof that something is wrong. We need to investigate further. Emily insisted, feeling frustration take over. Look, Emily, you're an excellent nurse, but you shouldn't get involved in matters that are not within your competence. Let the police handle this, the doctor responded, in a firm tone. Emily was shocked by Dr. Enrique's reaction. She couldn't understand why he wasn't taking her concerns seriously. She felt that she was facing something very serious, and she couldn't just ignore it. Doctor, please, I have a very strong feeling that this woman needs help. We can't just leave her to her own devices. Emily pleaded, but the doctor remained firm. Enough, Emily. This conversation is over. Go take care of your other patients, the doctor said, dismissing her with a hand gesture. Defeated, but still determined, Emily left Dr. Enrique's office with a lump in her throat. She knew she needed to act on her own to uncover the truth about Sophia's case. After the frustrating conversation with Dr. Enrique, Emily became even more determined to find out what had happened to Sophia. She knew she couldn't rely on the doctor or the police to thoroughly investigate the case. "I can't leave this woman to her own devices. There's something very wrong happening here, and I'm going to uncover the truth, no matter what," Emily murmured, as she walked through the hospital corridors. During her shifts, she continued to observe Sophia even more closely, looking for any additional signs or clues that could help her unravel the mystery. "Come on, Sophia, give me more signs. I know you're trying to tell me something," Emily spoke softly, holding the patient's hand. During her breaks, Emily delved even deeper into the medical and admission records, looking for information that might have been overlooked or omitted. She also began to discreetly talk to some other hospital professionals, trying to gather more clues. "Hey, Marcos, have you heard anything new about the Sophia patient case? Has the police discovered anything?" Emily asked, feigning indifference. "Unfortunately, no. The case seems to have reached a dead end. The police said there is not enough evidence to move the investigation forward," Marcos replied, with a tone of disappointment. That information left Emily even more frustrated. She knew she needed to act on her own, as she couldn't trust that the authorities would do the proper job. "I can't give up. This woman needs help, and I'm going to find out what happened to her, even if I have to do it alone," Emily told herself, determined. Day after day, Emily dedicated herself obsessively to the investigation, analyzing every detail, every sign, every change in Sophia's vital signs. She was increasingly convinced that there was something very serious behind this case. "No matter what happens, I will get to the bottom of this. This woman deserves justice," Emily concluded, feeling a mix of determination and fear of what she might discover. After weeks of observation and investigation, Emily finally reached a shocking conclusion about what had happened to Sophia. She was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing all the obstacles. During one of her rounds, Emily noticed something unusual in Sophia's vital signs. The monitors indicated brain and heart activity that did not match the state of deep coma the patient was in. "This can't be right. Is Sophia conscious?" Emily wondered, feeling a shiver run through her body. Determined to investigate further, Emily began to perform more specific tests to evaluate Sophia's neurological activity. To her surprise, the results confirmed that the patient had a much higher level of consciousness than expected for someone in a coma. "My God, this can't be true. Then Sophia is trapped in her own body," Emily exclaimed, shocked by the discovery. She immediately reviewed Sophia's medical records, looking for any information that could explain this terrifying situation. That's when Emily found a subtle, almost imperceptible note that left her even more horrified. It says here that Sophia showed signs of physical abuse. Then, she was attacked. Emily murmured, her hand trembling as she held the medical record. Everything began to make sense to the nurse. Sophia's strange marks on her body, the lack of information about the incident, and the doctor's omission it all indicated that the patient had been the victim of a violent crime. "My God, I was right all along. This woman needs urgent help," Emily exclaimed, feeling a wave of panic and indignation. At that moment, Emily knew she had to act quickly. She could no longer trust the authorities and the medical team. She had to find a way to save Sophia, no matter the cost. With a racing heart and a mind running a mile a minute, Emily began planning her next steps, determined to bring the truth to light and free Sophia from that terrible condition. After the shocking discovery about Sophia's real condition, Emily found herself facing a dilemma. She knew she needed to act quickly, but she couldn't simply ignore the medical system and protocol. "I can't stay silent. This woman needs urgent help, and I have to do something about it," Emily thought, as she nervously paced the hospital corridor. After much consideration, the nurse concluded that she had no other choice but to call the police. Although she knew this could have consequences for her, Emily couldn't simply stand by. "Damn, I hope I don't regret this, but I can't leave Sophia in this situation," Emily said, as she dialed the police station's number. As soon as the call was answered, Emily explained the situation in detail, reporting all her findings about Sophia's case. She emphasized the urgency to investigate what had happened to the patient. "Sir, please, I need the police to come to the hospital immediately. This woman is in danger, and I believe she has been the victim of a violent crime," Emily pleaded, feeling her heart racing. On the other end of the line, the officer seemed surprised by the seriousness of the information provided by the nurse. He assured her that a team would be sent as soon as possible to investigate the report. "Understood, ma'am. We'll be there right away." "Wait for the police to arrive at the hospital," the officer said, before ending the call. Emily felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Finally, the police were aware of the case, but she knew she would face resistance and distrust from her superiors at the hospital. "Now, we just have to wait. I hope they can get here in time and uncover the truth about what happened to Sophia," Emily murmured, as she headed back to the patient ward. She was determined to remain by Sophia's side and do everything in her power to protect the patient and ensure that justice was served. Shortly after Emily's call, a police team arrived hurriedly at the hospital. They went directly to the ward where Sophia was hospitalized, ready to investigate the case. "Good afternoon, I'm Inspector Rodrigo. We were informed that there is a patient in a serious situation here. I'd like to speak with the nurse in charge," said one of the officers, as they entered the unit. Emily immediately approached, her heart still racing. She knew she was about to face another challenge on this journey. "That's me, Nurse Emily. I was the one who contacted the police," Emily introduced herself, trying to remain calm. "All right, Miss Emily. Can we talk in a more private location?" Inspector Rodrigo requested, with a serious expression. They went to a small conference room, and Emily began to report in detail everything she had discovered about Sophia's case. "Inspector, I have strong evidence that this patient was the victim of some kind of crime. The marks on her body, the lack of information in the medical records, and her strange clinical condition indicate something very serious," Emily explained, with urgency in her voice. The officer listened attentively, taking notes in his notebook. He seemed surprised and concerned by the information provided by the nurse. "I see. And the doctor responsible for this patient, Dr. Enrique, is he aware of your suspicions?" Rodrigo questioned, furrowing his brow. "Unfortunately, no. When I tried to report my concerns to him, Dr. Enrique did not take it seriously and dismissed me," Emily replied, feeling the frustration resurface. "All right, we'll have a conversation with Dr. Enrique and the entire medical team involved. We need to understand what's going on here," the inspector determined, leaving the room accompanied by Emily. When they arrived at the patient ward, Inspector Rodrigo convened a meeting with all the professionals caring for Sophia. Emily watched apprehensively, hoping that the police would finally be able to unravel the truth about the case. Gathered in the patient ward, Inspector Rodrigo began to interrogate the medical team about Sophia's case. Emily watched attentively, hoping that the truth would finally come to light. The inspector began by questioning Dr. Enrique, the physician responsible for Sophia. Dr. Enrique, Nurse Emily informed us that she presented her concerns about this patient's case to you. Can you give us more details about that? Rodrigo asked, looking directly at the doctor. Well, yes, Mrs. Emily came to talk to me about some suspicions, but I don't believe there is reason for alarm. Everything indicates that it was an unfortunate accident, Dr. Enrique responded, with an unconcerned tone. However, when Nurse Emily was called to testify, her version of the facts conflicted with the doctor's. Inspector, I have evidence that something very serious happened to Mrs. Sophia. There are marks on her body, lack of information in the medical records, and changes in her vital signs that do not match a simple accident, Emily stated, with conviction. The inspector then requested the testimony of other team members, such as nursing assistants and reception staff. Well, I can't say much. I don't have knowledge of what may have happened to the patient, said Marcia, one of the assistants. Actually, the police have been here a few times, but they couldn't get much information. The case seems to have reached a dead end, added Marissa, the receptionist. As the testimonies were collected, it became evident that there were many gaps and contradictions in what was reported by the medical team. This only increased the feeling of tension and distrust in the environment. Something is very wrong here. These professionals are clearly hiding something, Emily thought, observing her colleagues with a concerned look. Inspector Rodrigo seemed increasingly intrigued and frustrated by the lack of clear answers. He knew he needed to get to the bottom of that mystery. Well, it seems we'll have to investigate this case more thoroughly. You all seem to be withholding important information, the officer declared, in a severe tone. At that moment, Emily felt that the tension in the air could be cut with a knife. She knew the investigation was just beginning, and that many challenges still lay ahead. After the contradictory testimonies from the medical team, Inspector Rodrigo decided that it was necessary to isolate Sophia from the rest of the hospital in order to ensure the integrity of the investigation. I have to take measures to protect this patient. Something very wrong is happening here, the inspector declared, in a grave tone. Emily watched with concern as the police surrounded Sophia's bed, restricting access to anyone not directly involved in the investigation. Inspector, what exactly do you intend to do? Emily questioned, apprehensively. After the shocking revelation of the truth about Sophia's case, the police and the competent authorities quickly took action to ensure that justice was served. Based on the evidence we have collected, we will proceed with rigorous legal actions against those involved in this case, declared Inspector Rodrigo, firmly. First, Dr. Enrique and other members of the medical team who had participated in the cover-up of the crime were arrested and charged with obstruction of justice and complicity in a criminal act. You're going to pay for hiding this horrible truth. How could you neglect a patient like that? The inspector accused them, as the police took them away. News of the scandal soon spread, and the hospital found itself embroiled in a major crisis. The health authorities and the institution's management were forced to take drastic measures. In light of these serious events, we are temporarily suspending the activities of this hospital. All operations will be interrupted until a thorough investigation is completed, announced the Secretary of Health, in a press conference. Emily watched everything with a mix of relief and concern. She knew that her denunciations had triggered that situation, but she couldn't help but feel bad for the colleagues who, apparently, were unaware of what had really happened. "I hope justice is served and that Sophia finally receives the care and protection she deserves," Emily thought, as she saw the hospital being surrounded by law enforcement agents. Furthermore, the police launched a thorough search for clues and evidence that could lead to those directly responsible for the crime committed against Sophia. "We will thoroughly investigate all possible connections and motivations for this horrible attack. This woman deserves for us to find the perpetrators," Inspector Rodrigo stated, with determination. Emily knew that this would only be the first step in a long and painful process. But for the first time, she felt that Sophia had a chance to obtain the justice she so desperately needed. After the turbulent revelation of the truth about Sophia's case, Emily found herself immersed in a whirlwind of emotions. She knew that her persistence had finally brought justice to light, but facing the reaction of her colleagues and dealing with the gravity of the crime committed against the patient left her deeply shaken. "I can't believe all this happened. I still can't process the magnitude of what we uncovered," Emily murmured, as she walked alone through the corridors of the hospital, now surrounded by police. She felt a mix of relief, sadness, anger, and guilt. Relief to know that the truth had finally been exposed and that Sophia would have a chance to obtain justice. Sadness at having to witness the pain and suffering of that defenseless patient. Anger at the colleagues who chose to cover up the crime. And guilt for not having been able to help Sophia sooner. "If I had acted more quickly, maybe I could have prevented all this. Am I the only one responsible for this tragedy?" Emily questioned herself, her eyes welling up with tears. She felt emotionally overwhelmed. Her dedication and sense of justice had pushed her into this situation, but now she had to deal with the consequences. "My God, how am I going to go back to work here after all this? How am I going to face my colleagues knowing that some of them were involved in this horrible crime?" Emily anguished, feeling lost. Alone in her office, the nurse let the tears flow freely. She needed to process everything that had happened and understand her role in that dark journey. "I did the right thing, I know that. But why do I feel so guilty and devastated?" Emily questioned herself, hugging herself as if seeking comfort. At that moment, she realized that uncovering the truth about Sophia's case had only been the beginning of a long battle. Now, she would have to deal with the emotional consequences of having confronted the system and exposed the tragedy that was hidden behind the walls of that hospital. After going through all the turmoil and intense emotions triggered by Sophia's case, Emily finally managed to step back a bit and reflect on everything that had happened. She knew that this experience had profoundly marked her trajectory as a nurse. "I never imagined I would face something so dark and challenging in my career. But at the same time, I know I did the right thing," Emily thought, sitting in her office, with a distant gaze. Recalling her entire journey, from the first suspicions to the revelation of the truth, made her understand the true meaning of that case in her professional life. "I've learned that sometimes we need to go against the system to do what's right. Even if that means facing obstacles and resistance," Emily murmured, rubbing her tired eyes. She was aware that her persistence and determination had made a difference in the outcome of that case. And despite the high emotional price she had paid, Emily felt proud to have been able to see it through to the end. "I could have simply ignored my suspicions and followed the orders of my superiors. But I couldn't live with myself if I had done that," Emily reflected, her voice trembling. Throughout that journey, the nurse had learned to trust her intuition and not to be afraid to question and challenge the authorities when necessary. She discovered that sometimes it's necessary to take risks to defend what one believes in. This case showed me that being a good nurse goes far beyond just caring for patients. Sometimes, we need to be their voices, their defenders, Emily concluded, feeling a renewal of her determination. Although the emotional weight of that case was enormous, Emily knew that the entire struggle had been worth it. Sophia would finally have a chance to obtain justice, and that was what really mattered. No matter what happens from here on, I know I did the right thing. And that gives me the strength to keep fighting for my patients, no matter what awaits me, Emily told herself, with a more serene expression. Ms. Emily, we'll need to keep this patient in total isolation at least until we conclude our investigation. We can't risk someone trying to intervene or interfere with our work, Rodrigo explained, firmly. Immediately, the medical team began to protest, visibly bothered by the measures taken. But this is absurd. You are interfering with our work here at the hospital, complained Dr. Enrique, visibly irritated. Doctor, I understand your concerns, but at this moment the police investigation takes priority. You will have restricted access to the patient until we can clarify everything, Rodrigo responded, maintaining a firm posture. Emily watched the scene with a mix of relief and apprehension. On the one hand, she knew it was necessary to protect Sophia and ensure that the truth came to light. But on the other, she feared the possible consequences that this action could bring. I hope this works out. I need to find out what happened to Sophia, no matter the cost, Emily thought, as she watched the police set up a barrier around the patient's bed. The hospital was in an atmosphere of tension and discomfort in the face of the police presence and the isolation imposed on Sophia. Everyone knew that something very serious was behind that case, and the investigation had only just begun. After isolating Sophia and intensifying the investigation, the police finally began to unravel the truth behind the mysterious case. Under the watchful eye of Emily, the officers worked tirelessly, scrutinizing every detail. This woman was the victim of a brutal attack. We found evidence of physical and sexual assault on her body, Inspector Rodrigo revealed, with a grave expression. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew her suspicions were correct, but hearing those words left her deeply shocked and outraged. My God, then my fears were confirmed. This poor woman suffered a terrible crime, Emily murmured, feeling her eyes well up. After analyzing the medical records and confronting the hospital staff again, the police reached an even more disturbing conclusion. It seems the medical team at this hospital knew about the patient's injuries and condition, but withheld information and tried to cover up the case, Rodrigo announced, facing the professionals with severity. What? This is an outrage. Dr. Enrique protested, visibly nervous. We would never have done something like that. Emily watched the scene with a mix of indignation and satisfaction. She knew that the truth was finally being revealed, despite the resistance of the medical team. Inspector, I have evidence that the doctor and other professionals knew what had happened to Sophia, but they chose to ignore and conceal the facts, Emily declared, firmly confronting the doctor. After analyzing all the evidence presented, Inspector Rodrigo concluded that Sophia had been the victim of a terrible crime, most likely committed by someone close to her. And worse, the hospital staff had deliberately covered up the case. This is a scandal. You will be indicted for obstruction of justice and complicity in a heinous crime, Rodrigo sentenced, ordering the immediate arrest of Dr. Enrique and some other team members. Emily felt a sense of relief and satisfaction in seeing the truth finally come to light. Now she knew that Sophia would have a chance to receive the justice she deserved, even if it meant facing the opposition of her own colleagues. When the shocking truth about Sophia's case was finally revealed, the hospital's medical team was completely stunned and shaken. "No, this can't be true. We would never have covered up a crime of this magnitude," Dr. Enrique exclaimed, with eyes wide in disbelief. Other team members, such as the nursing assistants and receptionist Marissa, also reacted with deep surprise and indignation. "But, wait a minute, Inspector. We didn't know anything about this. How can you accuse us of something so serious?" Marissa protested, visibly shaken. Emily watched the scene with a mix of satisfaction and pity. She knew that, despite everything, her colleagues probably weren't aware of the seriousness of what had happened. "Don't you understand? All this time, you've been deliberately hiding the truth," Inspector Rodrigo accused, staring at the team with severity. "This is outrageous. We just followed medical protocols and Dr. Enrique's guidance. We never imagined something like this could be happening." Marcia, one of the nursing assistants, defended herself, with tears in her eyes. Emily felt a pang of guilt seeing the reaction of her colleagues. She knew that many of them were dedicated professionals and had no direct involvement in covering up the crime. "Folks, I know you're shocked, but we need to face reality. Someone on this team knew what was going on and chose to hide the truth," Emily intervened, trying to remain calm. Inspector Rodrigo then ordered the arrest of Dr. Enrique and some other team members who seemed to be more involved in the omission of information. "This is outrageous. You can't do this to us," the doctor shouted, as he was handcuffed by the police. The scene was one of total despair and confusion in the hospital. Some professionals cried, others remained silent, unsure how to react. Emily felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. "I can't believe this is happening. I never imagined we'd reach this point," Emily murmured, watching the medical team being escorted by the police. That moment would profoundly mark the lives of all those involved in Sophia's case. The revelation of the truth had shaken the foundations of that hospital, and no one would know what the consequences of this terrible discovery would be. That case had shaped the nurse she was today, and Emily knew she would never forget the lessons she had learned. She was determined to carry this experience into the rest of her career, always striving to make a difference in the lives of those she had committed to care for. After the initial turbulence, the investigation into Sophia's case finally reached a resolution. The police were able to identify and arrest those responsible for the terrible crime committed against the patient. We were able to unravel the criminal plot involving patient Sophia. Now, the culprits will be duly punished by the justice system, Inspector Rodrigo announced, at a press conference. Emily followed the developments of the investigation with relief, but also with a sense of deep sadness. She knew that, even with the conclusion of the case, the emotional consequences of that experience would continue to mark her profoundly. "I'm glad the truth has finally been revealed, but nothing erases the suffering Sophia went through. And the pain of this case will stay with me forever," Emily murmured, holding a cup of coffee with trembling hands. Now that the controversy surrounding the hospital had dissipated, Emily needed to deal with the effects that situation had had on her career and professional relationships. "I don't know how I'm going to face my colleagues after everything that happened. Some of them were really involved in this horrible crime," Emily confessed, with a gloomy expression. She knew that, even with justice served, the trust within the medical team had been deeply shaken. And Emily questioned whether she would be able to resume her normal work routine. Will they accept me back? Will I be able to look at them the same way after all this? Emily anguished, fearing the uncertain future that awaited her. Furthermore, the emotional impact of being responsible for uncovering that crime had left deep scars on the nurse. She felt exhausted, both physically and mentally. I don't know if I'll be able to deal with all of this. I need time to recover, but I'm afraid I'll never be the same again, Emily confessed, with tears in her eyes. Despite the resolution of the case, Emily knew that this story would accompany her forever. She would have to find the strength to move forward, but she knew that nothing would be the same. After facing all the challenges and emotional consequences brought by Sophia's case, Emily finally managed to resume her routine at the hospital. However, she returned with a completely different view of her profession and the reality that surrounded her. It's strange to be back here, after everything that happened, Emily commented, as she walked through the corridors, feeling the gaze of her colleagues on her. Many of the professionals Emily worked with still looked at her with distrust and even hostility. After all, it was because of her denunciations that the entire scandal had come to light. I know they still blame me for all this. But I don't regret what I did, Emily thought, as she made an effort to keep her head held high. Gradually, Emily resumed her routine activities, attending to her patients with the same dedication as always. But this time, she had a more attentive and critical eye on everything that was happening around her. I can't let this traumatic experience make me give up. I need to keep fighting for my patients, even if it means facing my own colleagues, Emily told herself, determined. In a conversation with Dr. Olivia, one of the few professionals who had supported her during the investigation, Emily expressed her concerns about the future. Doctor, honestly, I don't know if I'll be able to keep working here. This situation has really shaken my trust in the system, Emily confessed, with a tired sigh. I understand your anguish, Emily. But you need to know that your work made a difference. Thanks to you, Sophia finally had a chance to obtain justice, the doctor consoled her, with a compassionate look. Those words comforted Emily, reminding her of the true meaning of her profession. She realized that, despite all the suffering, her persistence had caused the truth to come to light. That's right. I can't give up now. I need to continue being the voice of those who can't defend themselves, Emily concluded, feeling a renewal in her spirit. Gradually, Emily emotionally re-established herself and resumed her routine at the hospital. But this time, she did so with a more attentive, more critical, and more determined look to make a difference in the lives of her patients. This experience has shown me that sometimes we need to go beyond our routine duties. We need to be true advocates for those entrusted to us, Emily reflected, as she prepared for another day of work. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, but she was determined to face all the obstacles with the same courage and determination that had guided her during Sophia's case. After all, this was the essence of what it meant to be a nurse.